we understand that throughout the immigrant experience, we have seen how workers gain respect with employment. Everyone is committed to work when decently employed. Immigrant workers throughout history are following the logic of where wealth can be redistributed. And unions have always asked for decency in meeting subsistence needs. So every immigrant community that is now part of the American social fabric developed strategies to improve the immigrant community's struggle to survive. So a sense of awareness and a commitment to immigrant rights and responsibilities have always been part of the naturalization process. So what is important to appreciate in what we covered last week with regards to the generation that came of age in the 1930s, is these were immigrants as well as children of immigrants, is the arrival of a new union. And that union started as a committee known as the Committee of Industrial Organizations, and it transformed into what is known as the Congress of Industrial Organizations. So the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, was born out of a fundamental dispute within the labor movement over whether and how to organize industrial and immigrant workers. So I just want to emphasize that while the bottom third says committee, maybe you can find transform that word committee to Congress. And how it turned from committee to Congress is very important. Because those who favored craft unionism believed that the most effective way to represent workers was to defend the advantages they had secured through their skills. So craft unionists, trade unionists, were opposed to organizing workers on an industrial basis. Many craft unionists were prejudiced against immigrants. So the American Federation of Labor Leadership, the AFL, treated the CIO, first the committee, now the Congress, as an enemy from the outset. It refused to deal with it and demanding that it dissolve. So the AFL's opposition to the CIO only increased the stature of the CIO and John Lewis of the United Mine Workers in the eyes of the industrial and immigrant workers. So they were keen, the CIO was keen on organizing, and they were disillusioned with the American Federation of Labor's ineffective performance. So Lewis continued to denounce the AFL's policies, and meanwhile, the committee that changed into a Congress began offering organizing support to workers in the rubber industry who went on strike, as we saw last week, especially with regards to the Steel Workers Organizing Committee. And they did that in defiance of the craft divisions that the American Federation of Labor had required in past organizing efforts, and this in 1936. So the first major industrial union to be chartered by the CIO on November 16, 1938, was the United Electrical, Radio, and Machine Workers of America, also called the UE, one of the most powerful unions today, especially in media. Now, the subsequent growth, explosive growth of the UE was instrumental for the survival in the early days of the Congress of Industrial Organizations. And then the sit-down strikes occurred, and then Memorial Day Massacre that we talked about last week. It led to the popularity of the CIO. But what was very important with regards to the CIO was that it gave open arms to the immigrant, and most importantly, it represented previously excluded groups: African Americans, Mexicans, women, as well as immigrants.